We call this area Kaihayadle, shimmering waters. This is our home. Just like it's the home to the deer, the frogs, and the panther, this is our home.
This is the #1 cause of death, right?
Vehicle collision is #1. In the last 2 weeks, we have 3. We're gonna reach a threshold, or maybe we're already there for this little piece of land that's left for them.
Florida panthers once roamed the entire southeast, now mostly confined to just a small region along the Gulf of Mexico.
These animals are like ghosts. It's so hard to show the story. And you have to show people to create that connection, that love. Damn.
This morning, we're learning about a new bill that would add 3 major toll highways running through some of our most undeveloped areas in Florida.
There's only so many pieces of unspoiled paradise left.
It's been before my lifetime since the last female panther was documented north of the river.
Here's some nice tracks.
If we can show the world who that panther is, that's going to be the spark to save this whole corridor.
Now we've got a Category 5. The only population of Florida panthers occurs right where this hurricane is going to come through.
There's so much disappointment. Then there's this image of hope. If a big python gets me, will you come rescue me?
I'll film it. The animals, they don't see these imaginary lines. They're trying to get to the areas that they knew.
What this group's ultimately doing is deciding the future of wild Florida. To have new generations of panthers being born here will bring this system back into balance. This is it. This is nature's last stand.
Somehow it's still here, like a seed waiting to be replanted.
The panther is showing us that it's not too late. There's no limit to the balance that we can bring back across this entire continent. Thank you all, and thank you, Clay, for that inspiring and informative history. It's really motivating and humbling to think about the legacy of conservation in this state. And thank you to Mallory and the Florida Wildlife Corridor Foundation for including me in the program this evening. Most importantly, thank all of you for being here. You're all heroes to me for the work you do every day for Wild Florida. I stand here before you in tremendous gratitude. For those of you who have seen the film, as we saw in the trailer, you know I've spent a good bit of the past few years obsessed with trying to get pictures and videos of our state animal. But the reason behind that quest is a longer-standing passion and love for the land our state animal needs to survive. And that's the Florida Wildlife Corridor. For anyone here who I'm meeting for the first time, my name is Carlton Ward, Jr. I helped found the Florida Wildlife Corridor Project a number of years ago and the Florida Wildlife Corridor Foundation. And now I lead an organization called Wildpath. And we use National Geographic storytelling combined with advocacy campaigns like our Path with the Panther project to try to serve as catalyst for conservation. I'd like to thank and recognize Lauren Yoho from our team at Wildpath, who's here and responsible for a lot of the photography of the different properties that are being protected year after year. I'm going to share some photos and stories with you today, a lot of them focusing on lands that we have protected together, that have been protected in the past few years, like this picture of the Crippen Ranch. But I want to bring it back to this room for a minute, because it's everyone here who has breathed life into the Florida Wildlife Corridor idea and helped it go from a story and a map to a movement that enjoys this level of support. Because now the Florida Wildlife Corridor is officially recognized in state law, and it's a geography that belongs to all Floridians. That geography exists as a shared landscape because of all of you and its future depends on all of you. More than 15 years ago, when I first put the words Florida Wildlife Corridor in a Google search and came back with nothing, I had no idea that I would be standing here today with such a more clear sense of what those words mean together and what they mean to our state and to our world. And interestingly, this bear is on a property that has received some level of protection, the Hendry Ranch, since the Florida Wildlife Corridor Act a couple years ago. So often when I speak, I'm talking to urban audiences, I'm talking to groups who are out of state who have much less connection to wild Florida than the people here in this room. And I start out with an exercise that I'll do here still, even though your answers will probably be much more aligned with mine. I say, close your eyes and imagine wild Florida. And what's the first thing, the first picture you see? And for those groups, it's not often this: cowboys, or ranches that occupy 1/6 of our state by landmass. Or perhaps not the black bears that depend on forest ranging from Pensacola all the way to Naples. Lots of people think of the coast and perhaps the coral reefs and the dry tortugas, but fewer people think about a third-generation oysterman tonging for wild-caught oysters in the northern Gulf of Mexico. Lots of people think of manatees, but it's not always connected to the world's highest concentration of freshwater springs on which they depend. Or do people picture the ancient longleaf pine forest of the Florida Panhandle, the largest remaining swath of that ecosystem type left on the planet? Or a Seminole girl from the Panther clan maintaining her connections to her family's heritage in the Everglades in the land that she loves? Or the first female Florida panther documented north of the Caloosahatchee River in my lifetime? In a state best known for beaches and amusement parks and sometimes presidential elections, wild Florida is still here, but it's often hidden in plain sight, unseen, overlooked, or forgotten by many of our state's 22 million residents and 135 million annual visitors. My purpose with the work in the Florida Wildlife Corridor and alongside all of you has been to help change that. So my journey as an explorer and a photographer, has the slide changed here yet? Began in the Gulf Coast town of Clearwater. Before I started chasing panthers with camera traps and working as an explorer, apparently my parents wanted me to be a sailor and a scholar. Seems I had other ideas, pointing a camera at my younger brother Travis. But in truth, I didn't really pick up a camera until graduate school, where I had studied ecology and journalism and had an amazing chance to go work on 3 internships with the Smithsonian Institution in Central Africa. And this is where I encountered wilderness on this scale for the first time, a country that was still 85% forest covered. And working closely with scientists, I was documenting species that had never been documented before. And I learned the power of imagery combined with science to be a voice for conservation. Some of these were newly described species, and it was a really eye-opening experience. It's also where I got my first experience with camera traps. William Froon from the SDOT Foundation is here, and others, I can't even relate to what it was like to only have 36 exposures on a roll of film. I get that many false triggers from a rainstorm in the afternoon in Florida, but we were putting out film-based camera traps and not getting the film processed for 2 or 3 months at a time. Here I am testing at a spot in a river crossing in the rainforest in about 2001. But the purpose of camera traps is to capture pictures you cannot otherwise capture with a camera in your hands, and every once in a while it worked out. And I remember literally like bouncing off my bed when this slide came across my light table 4 months later. I'm like, okay, the Smithsonian is not going to fire me, because up till now, I've spent a lot of their money and have nothing to show for it. But in Gabon, I experienced true wilderness, and I gained an appreciation for large, connected habitats. And that became kind of the attraction and the blueprint for my career going forward. I had another opportunity. This was in 2004. I was working to tell the story of some migratory desert elephants in Mali, and working with the close cultural connections to people on the ground, like the Tuareg nomads who shared the same migratory routes through those North African deserts. During this time, I also had a chance to reconnect with a National Geographic Explorer and a man working with the Wildlife Conservation Society, Michael Fay, who had previously hiked. I mean, I thought our expeditions through Florida were pretty challenging at times, but his team walked for like 450 days for 2,500 miles from the central part of Africa and the Congo to the Atlantic coast of Gabon. But the work in a 3-part series in National Geographic magazine, and lots of advocacy to the elected in quotes for some of those Central African presidents, but helped inspire the creation of 13 new national parks in Gabon. So these were some of the inspirations for the work. In that previous picture, we were in an airplane. He was doing a project called the Mega Flyover, and we were looking out trying to find this desert elephant herd in Mali. So I was learning a lot about large connected landscapes, the power of communications and political advocacy to make a difference. But every time I got on an airplane and I left Florida for 1, 2, or 3 months, this was in the early 2000s, I came home to scenes like this. And it was really an eye-opening experience to recognize, as Clay mentioned, up to 100,000 acres of land being lost every year. And while there were 100 people who would happily take my place to work with the Smithsonian in Africa, I didn't see quite enough storytelling focused on this type of land and this type of loss in my own backyard. So I wanted to do work that could try to have an impact. And it's funny how you have these conversations in your mind. It was the beginning of the 30-year comprehensive Everglades restoration. And I'm thinking, well, do I want to focus on the Everglades, or do I want to focus on Florida's cattle ranches, which is maybe even a lesser known story? And just today we have the Everglades to Gulf National Conservation Area announced, which is a huge legacy of protecting ranches and working land. So it's really the same story all along. But the motivation at the time, Florida cattle ranches were then taking up 1/5 of the state of Florida by land mass and virtually missing from Florida's identity. So that's been my longest standing focus as a photojournalist, since 2004, in various forms or other, working to showcase the story of the Florida cattle ranch. It's been a tremendous journey. I've met so many amazing people like Andre Jumper from the Seminole clan, from the Seminole tribe of Florida. Ranchers like Carrie Lightsey, who he and his family have put more than 90% of their land in conservation easement. And when that first female panther showed up north of the Caloosahatchee River in 2016, I called Carrie to ask what he thought about that, because he has a lot of ranches in the northern Everglades. And I'll never forget his words as he said, "Carlton, the panther is going to have to help us save Florida, because it's going to help people understand why we need to save these large landscapes." So this has been such a privilege to be able to share and help provide windows and platforms into the worlds of so many heroes of mine, like Andre Jumper, like Carrie Lightsey. And it's also been a journey to reconnect with some of my own heritage. I grew up on the coast in Clearwater. with a love for the Gulf of Mexico, but a pretty suburban existence. But because my family still had some ranch land, I was able to have one foot in the heartland. And this is me as a young man with my grandfather, David Ward, on some family property in Hardee County, near the town of Limestone. And this is my great-grandfather, Doyle Carlton, someone who I never met. This is a photograph in the summer of 1929 on family property in that same area. The young man on the horse is Doyle Carlton Jr. This picture was taken during my great-grandfather's term as Florida's governor, as Florida's 25th governor. And remember this spot, it kind of comes full circle in the slideshow a bit later, but the young boy from that photo, Doyle Carlton Jr., was someone I had known from Thanksgiving and family holidays and visiting with him at Cracker Country at the Florida State Fairgrounds, which his family established there. And I spent a day with him in 1998. I wrote a magazine story for an assignment for the University of Florida. I had to do a personality profile. And I'll never forget the day that we shared. We went out and drove across his family's Horse Creek Ranch in Hardee and DeSoto County. And he told me about times where he would, as a boy, ride on horseback with the cowboys, camping out under the stars and never seeing a fence. And to think about the amount of change that had occurred in his lifetime. The decade when he was born, there were fewer than 1 million people in Florida. And when he died some years ago, we were pushing up against 20 million people. And he had a land conservation ethic that has passed down in his family where he said, this land belongs to God, and we're just here to take care of it. And so that's that quiet stewardship of the Florida cattle rancher that I'm so grateful and appreciative of their contributions to the state, because this wildlife corridor is really built on the backs of their legacy alongside so many other conservationists in other areas. I met a lot of different types of native Floridians. This is a black bear on a cattle ranch, photographed on the Hendry Ranch. I was with Joe Guthrie from Archibald, who introduced me to Florida's black bears in 2006. And this story's been well told, but these bears were super inspiring because of the way they moved across the land and connected up different parts of the landscape. One of the bears, Joe and his team put a GPS collar on, traveled 500 miles in 2 months and connected the dots of the wildlife corridor from, basically Glades County to Fort Myers, all the way up to the edge of Interstate 4. And the reason that bear was able to travel so widely is because of the ranches and the groves that were the connective tissue in that part of the state. I don't think that bear M34 skirted I-4 40-something times like Jody mentioned, but it was close to that. There's satellite imagery where the bear was skirting along the southern edge of I-4 like he could smell the green swamp to the north but couldn't find a way across. And it's because that's where Florida's worlds collide. The Everglades headwaters pushes up against the sprawl that's pushing out from Orlando and our other urban cores. Just a little more background till we get to some of the celebration of what we're here for this week. But the Florida Wildlife Corridor expeditions were inspired by those bears. They were inspired by the science of the Ecological Greenways Network that Tom Hochter and his team at the University of Florida had published, and inspired by something that only a 20-something-year-old person could think was a good idea, and that's to go on a 1,000-mile expedition up the Florida Peninsula with Joe Guthrie and myself and Mallory Likes-Dimmitt. And we traveled, as you may know, 100 days and 1,000 miles from the Everglades to Georgia, starting in the Everglades because the weather was better in January, but also because arguably this land has the most at stake in the proposition of whether we keep a connected corridor to help America's Everglades be connected to the rest of the state and the rest of the country. We traveled 51 days before we ever left the Everglades watershed. That's how vast this landscape is on the peninsula of Florida. And we experienced the Everglades headwaters near Disney and the Nature Conservancy's Disney Wilderness Preserve, and we ended our expedition paddling upstream on the Swanee River into the Okefenokee Swamp. And we're visited by the National Geographic Explorer I had mentioned, Mike Fay, and sitting around that campfire after a rainy, adventurous paddle, thinking about how we can keep this story going. We did a whole nother expedition in 2015 around the Gulf Coast, and later that year, I got an assignment from National Geographic Travel to photograph 10 different properties, parks and preserves in South Florida, one of those being Florida Panther National Wildlife Refuge. And not being a very good business person, I took a one-day assignment and turned it into a 2-month quest to try to get a picture of a Florida panther on a camera trap. And I was learning things about the swamp that you can only learn in hindsight, like how fast they can fill with water in the summer. But the blog I wrote about it was called Cooperative Bear, Frustrating Panther. And so that's all I got. 2 months, I got that, and we got a completely drowned out camera system. Alex Fries, who works for the Corridor Foundation, was a photo assistant on the project then, and went and rescued a camera as the water was literally taking it out. This is a cat that I heard someone mention earlier today called Broketail, who was there at the Panther Refuge. But it was a moment of recognizing how this animal could be a symbol for the lands that we wanted to protect. So I could talk to you for an hour about panthers, but fortunately there's a book and a film that tell that story, and I'll move my conversation more towards the most important part of the story, and that is the land that we are all together saving. This is a screenshot of a story map that was made by our friends at Archbold Biological Station using photographs that our team at Wildpath has been capturing of all the properties, 40 properties that have been protected by the Florida Department of Agriculture and the Department of Environmental Protection just in the past 2.5 years. So I'm sure it exists in other places, but if you go to wildpath.com/progress, you can find this story map. It's a really cool way to visualize the incredible legacy of land conservation that has happened in really just like 30 months' time. So the balance of my talk is going to be showcasing and celebrating some of the places that have been saved through this important work. These maps are by Angeline Meeks at Archbold, and we've been working with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection and the Department of Agriculture to help send out photographers from Wildpath, including myself, to get pictures to celebrate everything that is happening. I'll start with pictures from the Devil's Garden Florida Forever project. This is particularly timely because just at the September cabinet meeting, this land, 17,000 acres, was permanently protected as a public acquisition, a public land that will be able to be enjoyed for future Floridians. And that is 17,000 acres as part of 50,000 acres that has already been protected through the legacy in that particular area. These are lands that are really important in the core range of the Florida Panther and helping connect Big Cypress National Preserve further north up to the Caloosahatchee River. The next landscape we'll feature involves a couple phases of conservation on the Likes Ranch in the Fish-Eating Creek ecosystem. This is the area where the last female panther had been seen north of the Caloosahatchee River in 1973, and it is the frontier of recovery for the Florida panther right now, where females are just starting to show up and return. This was great work with partners like the Nature Conservancy to help identify and then work with the DEP to protect the Chaparral Slough. And this is I think it's a 9 or 10 mile long, 1 mile wide habitat corridor connecting all the way down to the Caloosahatchee River up to Fish-Eating Creek. And in a more recent cabinet meeting, some additional work was done for conserving land coming up to and near Fish-Eating Creek on the Likes Ranch. Some fabulous longleaf pine habitat, some of the southernmost longleaf pine in the area. And this guy. Haven't seen and captured a female panther on that ranch, but the ability for panthers to survive and the willingness for landowners to coexist with panthers is the hope for the recovery of the species. There's been no greater privilege in my career than to go out and point a camera at a piece of land that is about to be saved forever. You know, a photograph is nothing in comparison to the truth that this land is now forever protected. The next place we're going to visit here is the Corrigan Ranch, and this was a section that Fabi mentioned in her presentation earlier, which was the second largest population of Florida grasshopper sparrows, and I'll share a short video clip of some sparrows on that ranch. In a situation where the ranching and arguably the most endangered bird in North America are going together, and that bird exists and survives in many ways because ranching and stewardship of that habitat. This is now part of the adjacent Kissimmee Prairie State Preserve. It was purchased by the state of Florida through DEP and the Florida Forever program, also in the Avon Park Sentinel lands, also working with Common Ground Ecology and Florida Conservation Group. But really an inspiring story to see how this little brown bird is bringing people together from all different backgrounds to save vast tracts of the Everglades headwaters. The next place we'll visit is just a little further downstream. This is a stretch of the Kissimmee River flowing down through the Todd Clemens Ranch. This property was protected through a conservation easement. And I'm going to try to remember correctly, but when I shared the pictures that with Todd Clemens, the now patriarch of the family ranch, he shared with me a picture of his father's headstone. Pete Clemens, a famous Okeechobee cowboy. They still run the Okeechobee livestock market. And the Bible verse was Ecclesiastes 1:4 on the epitaph, and it said, "One generation passeth, and another generation cometh, but the land abideth forever." And you know, Todd was so proud because it was one of his dad's last wishes to see that land protected. And because of the resources inspired by the Florida Wildlife Corridor Project and funded by our state agencies and our state leaders, you know, he was able to realize that dream. Another stop to visit is Buck Island Ranch. And you guys, if you haven't been there, and it's an amazing cattle ranch and laboratory of research owned and managed by Archibald Biological Station, where you have incredible bird life, a rich ranching operation, and science that is quantifying the benefits of cattle ranching for the rest of the world and showing how we can have a more compatible use between working lands and preservation of biodiversity. Going back up to the Panhandle, you can see the pictures I've shown that I've done are a little bit biased to the central part of the state. It's because my kids are 5, 7, and 10, and it's harder for me to get to the Panhandle than it maybe used to be. We'll be sharing some more of those pictures soon, but this is a photograph from the Coastal Headwaters Project. This is the Florida Forever Project. The Conservation Fund worked closely with DEP and some federal partners, and there's been multiple phases of conservation protecting water bodies like this that feed. This is Coldwater Creek feeding down into the Blackwater River and providing rich habitat conservation and high water quality for places like Panama City and Pensacola downstream. And we're working timberlands are also part of that landscape legacy. Another amazing experience was to paddle along a stretch of the Rainbow River near Gissy Springs, where our friends at Conservation Florida helped negotiate and bring to the table, working with DEP, a conservation easement to protect this stretch of one of Florida's true treasures. It's a 5-mile-long spring-shed river that flows out of the head spring in Rainbow River State Park down to a confluence with the Withlacoochee as it moves its way down towards the Gulf of Mexico. It was freezing cold, but absolutely beautiful to paddle that morning. And this is Tracy Dean, the CEO of Conservation Florida, admiring a stretch of coastline that is now in permanent protection thanks to the work of her organization and so many of the state agencies and partners who helped make that happen. So now I'm transitioning to share some pictures by others on our Wildpath team. I'm so proud and thankful to work with talented photographers like Lauren Yoho, Katie Bryden, George McKenzie, who have gone out and captured some of these other properties. This is the Wolf Creek Conservation Area. I believe the Trust for Public Land has been a huge agent in multiple phases. I think there's been 7 phases of protection through the Florida Forever program in this landscape. Also, the Red Hills, multiple phases of conservation in different parts of the Red Hills, pictures by Lauren Yoho, showcasing an absolutely beautiful and rich part of our state, now with new protections, working closely with Tall Timbers as a land trust partner in helping make these conservation deals happen. Further south, coming back to Riles, Cattle, and Citrus, more photography by Lauren Yoho. And all these pictures of a lot of these properties, as Mallory mentioned before, are in the exhibit Corridor Connect that you can see that's up for the rest of the week. Big Penned Hollow Paw Ranch, Florida Forever Project, photographs by Katie Bryden. Charlie Creek Cattle Company, with some more photographs also by Katie Bryden. She's a filmmaker on our team who's not with us because she's at the Jackson Wild Film Festival out in Wyoming right now. And here's part of the Bluehead Ranch Florida Forever Project and a photograph by George McKenzie. So I'll end the slideshow of celebration because this is just a representation of some of the amazing acres, some of the amazing properties that have been protected. You can see more in the exhibit. You can see more on the website. But I'm going to bring us back to Horse Creek Ranch because last summer, it was like a full circle journey for me. This is a photograph I had taken back in 1998 when I visited Horse Creek on that tour with my Uncle Doyle. I took a picture on slide film of pines that are not looking quite so good after Hurricane Charlie, and others have been through in that area. But to go down by the water on Horse Creek with my cousin Doyle, and to know that because of the amazing work by Florida Conservation Group, Department of Environmental Protection, Southwest Florida Water Management District, and the generational commitment of his family, 16,000 acres of that cattle ranch are now in permanent conservation easement, protecting a vital waterway for the Peace River Valley and the Charlotte Harbor Estuary. This is like the model example of what I hope this Everglades to Gulf National Conservation Area will help empower more of, aligning those opportunities. So this is, it was a true moment for me to be there and to see the full arc of this story, where this work was inspired in me as a storyteller, and then to have the privilege to take a picture of land that is now forever saved in connection with this ongoing work. So in conclusion, please help continue to share this story. I am so thankful and so blessed to be able to be a small part of it in helping communicate and share this through pictures. These lands, the Florida Wildlife Corridor, they belong to all Floridians and everyone here, and we ask you to please help spread the word. If you go to wildpath.com/progress, you can download any of the pictures and the maps that were shown in this slideshow and more, and share them on social media and help celebrate the incredible progress. I've spent 7, 8, 10 years trying to tell the stories of Florida Panthers, Florida black bears, Florida cowboys. And the reason I'm telling this story is because what those animals are doing is they're showing us what we need to do to save a balance for ourselves, for my family, and for a chance for everyone's families to inherit and benefit from a state as beautiful as Florida, and the chance that we have to keep this going for the future. This is a picture I took just this past weekend of my kids, and they are my motivation of why we have to get this done. We can celebrate the success. We can celebrate, I had it as 160,000 acres, but as Tracy Dean reminded us, nearly 200,000 acres have been saved in the Florida Wildlife Corridor in less than 3 years. But as Clay pointed out in his presentation, we have a long way to go, because that 100,000 acres a year could still be lost to development. The economic study that the Corridor Foundation and others commissioned showed that we stand to lose 500,000 acres of the corridor by the end of this decade, and it helped us set conservation goals of trying to protect nearly 1 million acres on that same time frame. So we've accomplished 200,000 acres, but by those measures, we have 800,000 acres to go to strike this balance. And that means protecting 10,000 acres a month for the next 7 years to get to that parity between conservation and development, and that's what it's all about. So I am so humbled and so thankful for everyone's commitment to breathe life into this story and to make the Florida Wildlife Corridor a framework and a model and an example. And I am so hopeful by our past successes that we indeed can and will keep this movement going. And so that when we all gather up 6 or 7 years from now, we're looking back at change that you can truly see from space, and a generational legacy that we are all here giving to the next group of Floridians. Thank you.